I hope everyone is having a good evening. My name is Jessica Thomas, and I'll be facilitating the mental wellness chat for tonight. And I have been actually since the beginning of this mental wellness chat that we started a couple years ago. I wanted to start off by thanking Novartis for their sponsorship of the mental wellness chat. This has been an incredible resource, and as well, thank you to MS Views and News, because they are the reason that the MS chat even started several years ago. So tonight's chat, we're going to talk a little bit about why our moods matter with MS. We're going to talk about the intersection of mental health and MS, and we're going to talk a little bit about tools to help cope and manage mood issues as well as mental health symptoms. We're going to talk about and identify aspects of maybe anxiety or depression and other mood disorders with MS, and how MS symptoms may impact your mood, vice versa. And then also talking to your healthcare team. So we're going to cover a lot of material here. I'm going to try to keep it to right at an hour. So we might go through some of this a little bit faster. We might stay with some of it a little bit longer, and I'm going to try to keep you engaged. So we'll get going. So why do our moods matter with MS? Moods matter to everybody because they really play a central role in our lives, whether if you have MS or if you don't. And a person's emotional state influences really your physical state and your cognitive function. And then mental health just affects our overall quality of life. And so why do moods matter with MS? I think when we look at mood challenges, more than half of the people that live with MS experience some change within their moods through the course of, their disease. And if you think as a person, we also actually experience a lot of changes in our moods. They can fluctuate based on, the weather, like people that live up north. Sometimes when it's really cold and gray, their moods are impacted, and it can be more seasonally based, and you don't have to be up north just for that to happen. But that can affect how you're being with or without MS, and through the course of our lives, we may have mood changes anyways. But with MS, we can have an increase in our mood changes, and one of the mood changes I tend to highlight on or talk about a little bit more is depression, because depression really can affect our quality of life with MS, and when you look at depression with MS, it can be really second to physical disability in terms of how MS can affect you. So, and mood disturbances can cause enormous pain and suffering, and this can lead to problems within your family, your work, and your social life. So, and then often it can affect other things or it can co-occur with other symptoms like sleep issues or fatigue or cognitive problems. And mental health diagnoses are often unrecognized or undertreated in MS. And here's the thing, is that mood challenges and mental health symptoms, mental health is treatable. And so it's, MS is not curable. MS has treatments as well, but so do the other symptoms. And depression and anxiety are definitely symptoms. Mental health symptoms are important to recognize and talk about with your healthcare provider. So I'm going to go to our next chatbot question. Have you ever experienced any mood changes that should be or instead of, or mental health symptoms before? And I'll get us started because I don't mind being vulnerable because you guys are so vulnerable with me. So when I was first diagnosed with MS, I had really uncontrolled anxiety. And this anxiety was pretty bad, and it was impacting many, many areas of my life. And I was lucky to go through some cognitive behavioral therapy and to also start a medication that helped to manage the anxiety. And through that really helped to manage some of my mental health challenges. But a lot of my anxiety was framed around having a disease that I couldn't control. And I can definitely say my mood changes are impacted if I don't have enough sleep. So I'm going to go to the question box, and I would love for you guys to be vulnerable. And if you don't want me to say your name, just say, please don't say my name, and I won't. But there's something about that this can make it very real if we're vulnerable. And so I said I had anxiety, and I do have anxiety. It's just managed. So we have Stacy, who said, yes, that she's had depression. And Maddie says, yes, a lot of anxiety and depression, and learning about it helped a lot. Often, as a therapist, and I specialized in working with people with MS, talking about, I think one of the things that was really helpful is talking about some of the mental health conditions that people were experiencing or symptoms, and normalizing some of that, and also exploring ways and tools to help that, which we're going to do a little bit. We have Linda that she said she has anxiety with a mixed mood disorder, and Boylan a lot of depression. So as you can see that you're not alone here, and I can tell you as a therapist who is specialized in helping people, with the emotional aspects, you are not alone here. And so we may have just a couple people share, but the truth is that you are not alone. It's quite common. And so we're going to move on to our next one, and our next slide. Thank you. And our Rhonda had shared exercise helps my sadness, and we're going to talk about that too, like things that that we can do that will really help. And let me see if there's another one. Okay, no, sorry, there's a lot to keep up with on this mental health chat, so thank you for your grace. We're going to move on to our next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about the connection of disease and emotions. We have someone on the chat that just said that at one point their depression was triggered by medications. Well, we're going to talk about that a little bit here. Dion had shared that, and that's important because we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. So with the connection of disease and emotions, and this intersection, MS, affects your immune system, and so depending on what parts of the areas that MS impacts, a wide variety of symptoms can result. So mood swings are a common symptom of MS, and this is important to know. But the connection between disease and emotions is really often goes very unrecognized. But the connection between disease and or it's easy to see many of the physical aspects of MS, such as problems with like balance, walking, or tremors, etc., in comparison to the emotional impact, which is less visible. So if you think about that iceberg that I've mentioned in the past, the tippity top of it are the things that you can see. So that's going to be, maybe problems with walking, or might be cognitive issues, problems speaking, etc. It could be a lot of different things, but often that mood is in the bottom of the iceberg, and people won't know that's what you're dealing with unless you share. So having MS can raise your risk to some emotional instability. Now, this PowerPoint and this presentation is not all going to be negative. So I want you to know we're going to talk about tools and things that we can do, but we're just going to normalize this a little bit. So the truth is that MS causes a lot of ups and downs, and this can definitely impact your life, and because of that, it can impact your emotions as well. So we're going to move on to our next slide. So we're going to talk a little bit about causes of MS-related mood swings. So MS mood swings, and this is not a thing like everybody probably has some degree of mood changes. So I'm going to hone into some of the reasons that could cause someone with MS that has some mood swings, some of the reasons. So this is not a in total all exhaustive list, but this is a list that does count. So so mood swings can strike kind of without warning and leave you feeling kind of frustrated. And that gives you kind of a lack of like emotional control. That's kind of how we're going to define this mood swing. So it's important to understand the reasons for your mood swing, so that way you have some control. I think it's important for us to kind of know where we have control and where we don't have control. And so some of the common causes of MS-related mood swings would be like stress, anxiety, depression, pent-up frustration about something. I know if you've ever had problems with like your specialty pharmacy, or even navigating some of the systems within healthcare, that could give you frustration. Or if you've just been dealing with frustration with aspects of your life. The lack of coping, having the lack of good coping mechanisms can cause mood swings. Grief. Grief is, something we've talked about on the mental wellness chat as well, but holding in feelings of grief and which, definitely have a different range of symptoms, but holding in that grief can cause some, MS related mood swings. And usually with mood swings, this is important to know, is that with mood swings from grief really resolve in time. They last anywhere, from, a couple of weeks to a couple of months. But it's very important to know that when you're first diagnosed with MS, and I don't know how long people have been diagnosed on this chat, but grief can really play into it. But over time, that if you're having mood swings related to grief, that moves away. Like, for example, I always like to say that, when we're first diagnosed, it seems like it's all that we can see, and that it's just in front of us, and that is it. And over time, like the MS always stays here, this is MS, but we tend to see all the other things that are in front of us. And so some of if it's a grief related mood swing or grief related depression, anxiety, or et cetera, it usually will move and shift, which is good. You can have mood swings no matter how severe your MS is. It just, and sometimes they might feel like they kind of come out of nowhere. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between a mood swing and depression or anxiety, et cetera. I'm going to look at the chat box real quick because if I get too behind, then it won't be as relevant. Maddie said that he has had MS for 7 years. It's actually really good if you want to go in the question box and just kind of tell me how long you've been living with MS. This might be a good way to connect, and we can see the range of how long people have been living with their disease. And I've been living with MS for I'm going on 18 years soon, but right now I say 17 years. So I feel like it's starting to age with me a little bit. So we've got some people. We have Linda's been since 1998. Rick has been for 28 years. Kanita, 25 years. Dion, 35 years. Mary Lou, almost 9 years. Stacy, since 1985. So we have some MS veterans in here. And one thing to know is that next week we have a program with the MS Views and News. I think it's MS Now, I think is the title, or the type of program that it is. But we're going to talk about aging and mental health and aging with MS, et cetera. So I just wanted to do a shout out for that. We also have Paul has been diagnosed since 1993. Allison, 21 years. Helene, 45 years. Casey's had MS for 21 years. Robin has been since 2014. Rhonda has been almost 20 years. Jeffrey, 10 years with primary progressive. So we've got a wide variety, a lot of people. If we have anyone that's newly diagnosed, feel free to chime in. But we have actually a lot of people that have had MS for quite a while on here. So we're going to move on to our next slide. So managing mood changes and mental health symptoms. Mood swings may feel kind of difficult to manage, but there are some steps, some things that you can do to manage mood swings. The first one is talking to your doctor. If your mood swings are becoming hard to deal with, it might be time to talk either with your PCP or even your mood specialist, or not your mood specialist, your MS specialist about. I know that when I realized when I was having my anxiety can waver from time to time. And so if I notice that my anxiety is increasing, it's becoming more present, then I make sure I talk with my MS specialist about that. I definitely implement all the tools and resources and everything I have, but if it's starting to feel like it's exacerbating more and I can't take care of it with just the tools and coping and et cetera, then I talk with my doctor. So that's one of the first things you do. Another thing that you can do is go see a therapist. Once any physical aspects of your moods have been ruled out, or causes potentially have been ruled out, consider seeking treatment with a therapist. A therapist that would be really specialized in being able to help you come up with some coping mechanisms, and maybe even look at the overall landscape of what might be contributing to the mood changes. Social support, staying connected. I'm so glad for every single person that is on this call this evening, or on this chat, because you guys show up for each other, and your names are also familiar to me at this point, as we've been doing this for a couple of years. But that social support, and so hopefully you'll continue to have a social support, in your community, etc. But this is one avenue of that as well. Adjusting your diet. Sometimes when we're a little bit more stressed, or feeling sad or feeling frustrated, we might deviate to eating junk food. And the truth is that when we eat junk food, it might increase our fatigue, it might increase other physical symptoms. So kind of finding ways to limit eating bad, or deviating to that kind of emotional eating, etc. Get regular exercise. This helps so incredibly much. Exercise is good for you, and it's not only good for your body, but it's really good for your brain and MS. Exercise might look different for you than it does for me. I know even for myself, exercise looks different from the summer to the winter. So finding the right type of exercise is good for you. And then making time to sleep. Good sleep is imperative so we can recharge, but often people tend to have a lot more mood instability if they're not sleeping well. And then that can create like a vicious cycle with our MS symptoms. So if we're not sleeping well, we might feel more fatigued. Because we're more fatigued, might experience more cognitive problems. Because of that, we might get frustrated. So it could be very much a cycle. And then also with mood symptoms, if we're not sleeping, we don't feel as good. So we might be easy to being frustrated or snappy, etc. And then that creates, more frustration, etc. So there's a lot of cycles here when we don't sleep well. And then, knowing that managing your mood, swings might be a difficult process, but you're not alone. So reaching out to others, and reaching out for help when you notice like signs that either your mood has changed, or you're experiencing some down moods, or your mood has been shifting, or your mood feels flat, etc. If you're noticing changes in your mood, talking to someone that cares about you, like your healthcare provider. I'm going to ask here, and so mood changes. Do you experience any mood changes related to your MS? And how do you know, and what does it look like? I'll get us started. So I know that when I'm really fatigued cognitively, that my anxiety increases actually a little bit. So that does create a little bit of a mood change for me. And what does it look like? It's uncomfortable to drive when I feel a little bit anxious sometimes. So that's something that I've noticed. I noticed people that I've worked with before, collectively as a group, like that, I notice when their physical symptoms are higher, say that they're, that they've noticed either that they've had a MS relapse, or that they've just had symptoms that have been more active, that often it can lead to either feelings of anxiety or depression, more sadness, more anxiousness, or more irritability or frustration. So I do notice with patients that I've worked with that happens. We have Linda that said she has a big emotional component to her MS. When her symptoms increase, she has more mood issues. Yeah, that's exactly what I was mentioning. So thank you for putting it in those words, Linda. And then Rick said, not sure, but has a lot of grief. And so grief could be, related to, the losses that you're experiencing, or changes, etc. And that can create a variety of different emotions. Maddie says, yes, too. Cognitive problems can make me feel more emotional and overwhelmed. And that's a very common thing. If you are on here, on the call, and you realize, like thinking about this, if you have any cognitive issues that you tend to, feel like, overwhelmed or frustrated, etc., that can be very common too. So Maddie, thank you for sharing that. Let's see if we've got anyone else on here. Okay, we're going to keep going. But it's important to know, like there might be paying attention to like if things with your MS actually impact some of your your mood. And because that, the more you understand about yourself and your MS and your responses to MS, including mood changes, that's where you get a little bit of, possibility of some control. We've got a couple more responses here. We have Mary Lou that said, balance issues always frustrate her. And Stacy, I notice I get frustrated with people and I feel helpless in my journey with MS. And those are two, thank you for sharing those. And Linda said, my anger mood helps me get better, if that makes sense. I might need a little bit more explaining, Linda. I don't think I quite picked up on that, but or maybe when she's frustrated, that helps to give her a little bit more drive. I bet that's what she means. So we see here that our moods definitely, our MS impacts our moods to some degree, and that's important to know. Okay, Linda said, she says, I fight harder when I'm angry. Okay, thank you. I was kind of thinking that we were on that route. Okay, we're going to move on to our next slide. So we'll move on to our next slide again. So we're going to talk a little bit about managing MS-related mental health concerns. So there's the mood changes, which are kind of subtle. And then there is, the actual mental health concerns that, are important. So if you are experiencing symptoms of anxiety, depression, or serious mood shifts from, like a mood disorder, etc. How do you manage that? So there's a couple of different ways that, I think it's important for us to consider when we think about management of those. And again, it goes to talking with your healthcare team, letting them know, because it's invisible again. That they won't see those things unless you disclose those things. Other ways of managing are things like exercise. And we had Rhonda on here earlier that said exercise helps my sadness. I think, exercise is really important, as well as, that sleeping again, taking care of yourself in the areas that you have the control. And making sure that you're talking with your doctor about it and reminding yourself that it's normal. If you have feelings of depression, a lot of people have feelings of depression, or a lot of people experience sadness, or a lot of people experience anxiety. But if it is treatable, then it's important to talk with your doctor about. Now, we did have someone, I believe it was Rick, that mentioned grief. And if you're experiencing grief with your illness, it's important to manage that too. And how do you manage grief? Managing grief is giving it a place at the table. Maybe it's working with a therapist. Maybe it's finding a way to explore the reasons that are of the grief, and also allowing yourself to work through them. And working through them might not look pretty or easy and might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but giving yourself space to work through them. I've had, for people that can identify with a sense of grief, I'm trying to see what I have here that I could give as an example. Okay, I'll say it like this. This might be a good example. I always think about like a tennis ball. And so a tennis ball is yay big. And if you were to put a tennis ball in a jar that was just a little bit bigger, and the tennis ball would sit there and it would touch everything. That's how grief feels like sometimes. It feels like it touches every single thing. And sometimes we would wish that we could just take that tennis ball out and we could throw it away and get it out of that jar, which is our life. But the truth is that we can't do that with grief. Grief kind of takes space, and it needs to take space. And if we throw it out, it just comes right back, and it might come back even bigger later. So the idea of grief is that we allow ourselves to work through it. And by doing that, what it does is it allows, we evolve around it. So the grief technically stays the same size because it's an important thing that we've processed, an important part of our life. But we grow around that grief. So managing grief is really important, and a therapist, counselor could definitely help with that process. So we have Antoinette here that says, Yes to exercise, especially walking and talking in nature and being present and appreciative of it. That is so great. Thank you for sharing. And then Dion said the endorphins released during exercise help to boost my mood. If you need a mood boost, and we've talked about this before in the past, if we can sometimes feel like we're spiraling down, but there's little things that we can do that can help spiral us up. So if we need a little mood boost, sometimes exercise is the best thing we can do because it does create those endorphins. And because of that, that helps us to feel a little bit better. So that, and then also it might help with fatigue a little bit too. And so when I'm saying exercise, again, exercise looks different for all of us. And I want to reiterate that so much, but whatever you can do to kind of help spiral you up a little bit will help with that mood. So we're going to talk. So there's some biology with MS and mental health and MS and mood changes. So MS can create, because of the location of MS, physically in your brain, you can be more predisposed to having some mental health and mood changes. Also, just some of the unpredictable nature of MS, I think, can create some of the mood changes and mental health symptoms. Some of the impacts that MS has on our life in terms of changes with employment, which sometimes can change our sense of purpose, changes in our ability to do things physically that we were able to do before, that can create some mental health and mood changes as well. So there can be a couple different components of this that MS depression and anxiety and mental health issues and mood changes can organically be present because of MS, but also because of all the other things that happen around living with MS, if that makes sense. A great number of people that I've worked with in the past that have come into counseling, honestly, is during transitional time. So it's that, like, it might be during a relapse or at their early diagnosis, or it might be at transitional changes, like they may decide, you know what, I think it's time to maybe consider not working anymore. And so I also think that during those transitions and those times that you may experience more you're more susceptible to mood changes in terms of, just basic sadness, grief, loss, and depression, etc. So we're going to move on to our next slide. So we're going to move on because I kind of actually answered that one. And I answered that one too. So we can see that there's, changes due to MS. So changes from disease medications. I wanted to talk about this a little bit because this can impact our mental health and our mood. And I believe that Dion had mentioned at one point that there was a medication that impacted her mood. So there are medications that really can help with moods and help with mental health symptoms, but sometimes some of our medications that are taken can actually impact our moods too, and that's important to be aware of. How many of you on the mental wellness chat, if you're feeling comfortable enough to share, have had to do like a steroid taper or take steroids and have seen that that's been something that has changed your mood a little bit? And I don't want to call out any medications or names of medications or any pharmaceutical stuff here, but some medications do can have had adverse reactions where someone might experience some depression, etc. So it is important to talk with with your doctor if you're experiencing any mood changes, any mental health symptoms related to medications that you're taking. And you may feel like, if you ever feel like it's all in your head, I want you to know that you matter and what your experiences are matter. And if you're experiencing something, just because it may feel unusual, I want you to still talk with your doctor about it. There also, there are, as a therapist, I can share, and this might be something normal. Have you ever felt like anxious about starting a new MS medication or treatment or making a treatment decision? I've noticed that as a therapist, I've had to help people during times that they've started new medications and to help them kind of reduce some of their anxiety because these treatment decisions are not easy to make, and sometimes we can experience some anxiety or even some reactivity to just the idea of having a side effect or be impacted in some way. So treatment decisions are not hard. And if you have not experienced that, if it's been easier for you, that has been so great. But I know for many people, it's a really tough thing to make a treatment decision. And let's see. So Dion said, I don't remember what the medications were, but I felt like I was on a roller coaster. So thank you for sharing that, because if you would have named, I wouldn't be able to mention it. But yeah, so if you're noticing that you're taking a medication, you feel like you're on a roller coaster, or you're feeling like your moods are changing, et cetera, or you feel like your mental health is a little bit different, talk with your doctor. And then on the flip side, that there are, talking with your doctor is really important, because, the mood issues with MS can be treated with medication. It also can be treated with other resources, which we're going to talk about here very soon. But medication sometimes can help. And what this really goes down to is this is about your quality of life. And when your moods are not managed or mental health symptoms are high, the truth is that your quality of life is not as great. And this is one area that can definitely be treated. So it's important. So we have a couple people. Allison said she was very energetic on steroids. Some people don't sleep well on steroids. Kanita said steroids as well. And that, experienced some good symptom or good experiences on it, but it definitely can, kind of get you kind of feeling too much. And then Rhonda says she checks her vitamin D3 level. Okay, we're going to move on to our next slide. When to worry about mood and mental health with MS. If I have any people on here, and I'm just asking for your vulnerability, if anyone on here has experienced mood changes that made them stop and say, you know what, I need to get some help, what were they? What did you notice? I'm going to share a little bit as a therapist, what I would recommend for you to, if you're noticing this. If you're noticing that you are having trouble sleeping, that you are feeling worried often, or your stress level is really high and you haven't been able to provide coping mechanisms to get them to reduce some of that stress, or if you've noticed that that your level of you're not wanting to get out of bed, not because you're tired and fatigued, but you really are struggling with feelings of apathy and lack of motivation. If you are noticing that you are struggling with anxiety that just feels like it's kind of overtaking, more areas of your life than not. If you're having a hard time doing things that you were able to do before, I think that this is important. Or if people that love you notice that you haven't been feeling, it doesn't seem like you've been acting the same or feeling the same, and they keep checking in on you, that might be a good thing. But kind of thinking about, how have I been feeling? And has this impacted my life? What is my quality of life right now? It doesn't hurt to speak with a doctor, and it doesn't hurt to speak with a counselor. It really does not. And what you can get from that is, definitely an improvement of someone paying attention to you to help, but then also someone on your healthcare team, someone that can help, pay attention to that and then hopefully help with those symptoms. So Maddie said irritability and stress, and how I'll survive waiting for Social Security. So I'll stop here for a second, and I'm going to ask the group, how many of you have had to go through the SSDI process and found that that it was really hard emotionally to navigate that process? So we have Maddie, who also says, but I'm feeling the love and friends from friends and family and the community during this time. Boylan says, when I tend to shut down. So when you tend to shut down, so that's definitely, if you're feeling like you're shutting down, that's a time to worry about it and to talk with your doctor. We have someone on here that said, yes, they're currently waiting on a hearing date. So they understand, Maddie, what you're going through. We actually have Jeff, who is in this process too now. So Maddie, you know that you're not alone. There's actually other people on this call that are going through the same exact process. One of the things I usually like to share during any time talking about the disability process is that this is one of the most highest times that people are emotionally vulnerable, because it's hard to say that you're not going to be able to work. Sometimes it takes a long time to make that decision. Then you make the decision to apply, and then it's a hard, frustrating process. And especially with MS, because some of MS is an invisible disease. And so in counseling, this is a transitional time that I would see a lot of patients. And I want to normalize that this is a hard period of time. There usually is an ending to this period, but it doesn't ever feel like that ending will get there, because it takes forever. It's a long process. If you have any encouragement for our people applying for SSDI and having to kind of deal with that, please feel free to put it in the question box. But we're going to move on to our next slide. So here's that this iceberg slide that I share all the time. Emotional issues, again, tend to be underreported. So I just want to encourage you that if you are experiencing any mood changes, or if you're noticing any shifts within your mental health, that you talk with your doctor about it, because it affects so many aspects of your life, and it really can continue to impact your experience with MS. Again, it's the second kind of it's one of the second symptoms that can cause the most disability in MS is actually the depression, more than the physical. So we have someone who was finished in 8 months and was so relieved. What I'll take from that, Melissa, is she was so relieved when the worrying was over. And that is true. And I know this from working with patients, is that once the ending reaches you, whenever that is, it is a big relief that piece is behind you. And we have Linda, who never went through the process yet. We have some people that have not done that as well. Okay, we'll move on to our next slide. So mental health symptoms and mood can be treatable, but it's important to know that that we have to utilize the tools that we have. So the treatment can be medication, it can be through behavioral activation, and through cognitive therapy. And so with a medication, there are a lot of different medications. I did a presentation a while back, or a MS mental wellness chat, that went a little bit more in detail to some of the medications that are available to manage, but you can talk with your healthcare provider about those. The behavioral activation is that exercise. And we did have someone on here, I wanted to she mentioned that dancing helped. So when we talked about exercise, dancing is a different form of exercise, but it's a form of movement, which is great. Behavioral activation is doing those things that will help to create endorphins that ultimately help your mood, and knowing that exercise is really helpful for your brain as well as it is for your body. And then the other aspect of the other tool that you can tap into is cognitive therapy. And some of this therapy, is done through a counselor or therapist, and tools and resources that you can use to apply to your everyday life. And some of it is talk therapy, but the cognitive piece is where you will learn different ways of thinking and helping, different viewpoints, different ways to look at things, etc., and different strategies to address some of the challenges that you're living with. So coping with stress and mood tools. Again, I've kind of repeated this. This probably is a little bit redundant, this one slide, but really it's, avoiding irritants to stress. So in your life, what are some stressors? Like, what are some things that stress you out? So let's go to the question box and just type in right there. What are some things that stress you out? Some people, it can be related to work. It can be people in our lives can stress us out, like certain people, etc. If you drive, a certain route every day, and there's a lot of traffic, and that creates a lot of stress with you internally. Maybe it's looking, is there an alternate route that you can go? If you are struggling with running late, it may be changing and that creates a lot of stress. It might be changing how you manage, getting up, etc. If you always lose your car keys, which I can do that sometimes, it's changing where you put your car keys and just kind of changing some of the things that create stress. So we have, Kanita said, online games with time limits are stressful. So yeah, that can be stressful. This might be for that, like finding games that don't have the time limit, or honoring the time limit, that's a way to kind of have like some space. But I do think that anytime you have something with a timer, it can be stressful. It's kind of like running late. So finding other things to do that don't have that. Sensory overload is overwhelming. Melissa said this is so true. So if you taking it, say if you go to a carnival, if you think about that, and that's a good example of like sensory overload. There's music, there's things going on, bright colors, everything. And sometimes for people, especially if you are sensitive to that, that can be very overwhelming, and that can cause, more, mood changes, anxiety, frustration. It can actually make you a little bit fatigued too. It can affect the energy level. So finding things that limit that. Other things is to avoid irritants, so avoiding alcohol or, caffeine at high levels. I say that I have a coffee here, so I'm not judging. But finding, coping, finding ways to reduce the things that might irritate. I know that, I'll be fine this evening, but if I had a lot of coffee and that kept me up, then that's kind of an irritant to my stress, because then I will have a stress reaction because of that tomorrow, or I'll feel a little bit worse. Okay, so we have Linda who said avoiding fluorescent lights. That helps with the over sensory. And Maddie said, I'm not even thinking about carnivals. That was the only example I could think of so fast. So finding the things that, knowing what creates stress and finding ways to limit stress is really important, and how you can stay away from it. I saw this incredibly great, goodness gracious. It was it was kind of funny. I think it was a meme of some point, but it said something to the effect of like, to avoid crowded situations means to avoid a crowded situation. So finding out the tools and the resources that you need to kind of create the best kind of environment for yourself. And then finding the best mood tools for yourself. And that might be exercise, that might be dancing, that might be music. We talk about these coping mechanisms all the time. And you guys have some really great ones that you have in your back pocket. If you are struggling with coming up with coping mechanisms or tools to help manage stress or manage some mental health symptoms or tools, I want you to, one, you're always welcome to let me know in the chat. But I want you to consider telling your doctor. These are things I want you to think about in terms of disclosing, because your doctor won't know that, and they won't probably ask, but you can tell them. And through that, that's the beginning of getting help. So we'll move forward. So a mood tool, thinking. So this is just a quick strategy tool. So we're going to, one of the tools that, one of the things that we can do if we notice that we are, in a kind of in a funk, is that we can think about the things that we are grateful for, or look around and pay attention and see if you can pay attention to kind of what's around you. Maybe focusing on, like a grounding exercise, things that you see or hear, what are some of the smells, etc. That can help kind of change your mood a little bit. Or thinking about things that you're grateful for me, is one of the easier things to go to. When I'm feeling stressed, I can think about, all these things might be going wrong, but what's going right? Because there's a couple things that are going right in my world right now. Or what is it, if I look around the room, what are some things that I could be grateful for? A good example, if I was, in a place where I needed that, I would definitely be grateful for how active you guys have been on this chat tonight. You all have been amazing, and such great participants. And that would change my thinking. But I want you to think about, what is it that I could be grateful for? What is something small that I can look at? And that can help you look at things a little bit different. And I'll give you another example. So this right here is a little jar of pearls, and inside here are also lemon drops. And I think lemon drops are like the bad things, the hard things, so like I had an MRI on Sunday last week. That was a lemon drop by far, and having to wait for results is a lemon drop to some degree, and there's other lemon drops here, but I am in control of all the little pearls I put in here to balance this. So if you can visualize, okay, I've got some lemon drops, and that's creating the mood, problems, but what pearls can I put in my jar? And the pearls, is a collection of small little things that make a difference. So we'll move on to our next tool. Exercise and movement. Again, it looks different for all of us, but this is one of the best mood tools that we can utilize. And if you are having trouble with coming up with a plan to exercise, or you haven't exercised, or you feel very limited because of your disease and limitations from that, I encourage you to tell your doctor, maybe get a referral for physical therapy, and that may help you to develop some sort of exercise routine that you can safely do. But I cannot say enough, as a therapist, that exercise and movement really helps us on lots of different levels. We'll move to the next one. Rest. I know I talk about sleep so much, but it's because rest is one of the main things that we can do to reset our mood, and we need that ability to have that reset. So, if you're not sleeping well or you have trouble sleeping, I encourage you to talk with your doctor about it, not saying that a medication is necessary, but maybe even there's things on your mind, or maybe there's things that you're doing that are counterproductive to sleep. Because I think about my phone, and our phones can be so good for us. They're connectors. They're little computers that help connect us to people and things. But they also, the blue screen can keep us awake at night. And so thinking about what things we're doing that kind of help to increase sleep or hurt us to going to sleep. And I definitely know for having a sleep routine can be helpful. And we've talked about some of this in the past. So I don't want to stay there, but if you have any strategies for helping go to sleep, please feel free to share it in the question box. I always say sleep hygiene is so important. Probably the best thing I do is I take a hot bath or a warm bath every night. And I think that kind of decompresses me and kind of sort of has become my routine before going to bed. And that has been a good tool. So it's kind of part of the relaxation, and then it's reading. So the last tool we're going to share is on breathing. And breathing can help to reset our mood a little bit because it can help us refocus. And I've shared this breath before, but I'm going to share it again because it's a good one. Our breathing pattern is going to be, it's a 1 to 2 breathing. So our exhale is going to be twice as long as our inhale. So we might inhale for a count of 3, but we're going to exhale for a count of 6. And the reason why we're going to do that is because on the exhale, we are activating our vagus nerve that is going to help calm our body a little bit. So we're going to do 3 cycles of this breathing. So we're going to breathe in for a count of 3, and we're going to exhale for a count of 6. And so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. We're going to do a count of 3. We're going to do 3 cycles of this. So we're going to breathe in for 2, 3, and then exhale for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Inhale for 2, 3. Exhale for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Inhale for 2, 3. Exhale for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, I highly recommend doing practicing this for like a minute or several series of it, but just even focusing on your breathing can help kind of recalibrate your mood a little bit. But it does help to calm your body, and that can help you in a moment that you need that help. I'm going to read some of the things that you guys have said. Listening, Kanita said, listening to the news at bedtime keeps her stressed. Yeah, I definitely think that's a good thing to avoid before bed. Breathing in and holding is something that Kanita does that helps us stop. So we're going to move on to our next slide. So what is your number one thing that you do that helps to improve your mood or helps how you're feeling? So I just want to share this. So Linda said singing. I love it. I'm going to say me going outside for myself. So going outside and getting fresh air always improves my mood. Mary Lou said listening to music. Maddie said playing music. I love it. We're a musical group here tonight. I'm going to say that probably dancing is good. Meditation. Janine said earlier, meditation and exercise. Those are actually really great. Kanita said watching comedy routines. I do that too. That's a super thing to do. Sitting in the sun, Maddie, that is so nice. And the sun has been great in the Carolinas here. Antoinette said laughing. I agree. Fresh air and artwork. So you see that there's things that we can do to help with our mood. You know, the good thing is with our moods, we often can help kind of modify them. Now, if we're experiencing symptoms of mental health, we need to talk with our doctor about that as well. Let's move on to our next slide. What is your one takeaway from tonight's program? I just added interest and I'll keep looking. So my takeaway from tonight's program is that we have a couple people that are applying for Social Security disability. And so there is I think a complete awareness like how that's a very vulnerable time. And then also my other takeaway is that you guys are not alone. There's been a lot of connecting tonight, which has been really great. So Linda said, I'm not alone in my anxiety and moods. Oh, hi, Pam. So Pam from High Point is on. It's so good to see you. She's from my community too. I remember you, Pam. So so thinking about like, what are your takeaways from Maddie said he appreciates the connection very much. So when you reflect later on tonight's program, I want you to reflect on, some of the tools that that are people shared with one another and the resources. If you are struggling, or Casey said she feels like she's not alone. That is one of the best things about this chat is that you know that you're not alone and that you can connect with other people. I wish that we could all see what each other put, but I'm so glad that you guys are willing to trust me with your thoughts and experiences as I ask the questions, and then you let me read the responses. So if you know me and know me well enough, this is my final slide I usually use. And I don't like to say goodbye to people because we have built such a good community here, and we will be back next month, or actually in a couple weeks because today's March. But so it's not goodbye, see you later, and I wish you guys all a beautiful evening.